There is a moment, usually quiet and strangely ordinary, when a person who has avoided alcohol for an entire year suddenly realizes they are no longer the same human being who took their last drink. It doesn't hit with fireworks, applause, or dramatic inner revelations. It arrives like a whisper. Something feels different. Thoughts feel cleaner. Reactions feel slower in the best way possible. The mind stops operating like a machine that overheats every time it runs. Instead, it begins to feel like a living system that finally has room to breathe. People often imagine that quitting alcohol is only about removing a toxin from the body. But the truth is far more complex. Alcohol doesn't just influence your brain, it redesigns it, hijacks it, rearranges its priorities, and convinces it that chaos is normal. So when someone reaches one full alcohol-free year, what happens inside their brain isn't just healing. It's reconstruction. It's rebirth. It's the return of a version of them that alcohol quietly buried years ago. But to understand this transformation, you have to begin with a truth most people never hear. Alcohol changes the architecture of the brain long before it becomes a problem. Even moderate drinking does this. Alcohol behaves like an aggressive negotiator inside your neural circuits. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't offer compromises. It forces your brain to adapt to its presence by rewiring the balance between excitement and calm, pleasure and stress, reward and consequence. When alcohol enters the bloodstream, it binds to GABA receptors that control inhibition, slowing down overactive pathways. At the same time, it suppresses glutamate, the neurotransmitter responsible for alertness and memory. The result feels like relief, but the brain experiences it as an invasion. And the brain does what all systems do when invaded. It adjusts to survive over time. It reduces its natural calming abilities because alcohol is doing the work for it. It increases its excitatory chemicals to counteract the repeated sedation. Without the person realizing it, their baseline becomes distorted. They think they need alcohol to feel better. But in reality, they need it to feel normal. So when someone removes alcohol for 365 days, the brain is not just detoxing, it is renegotiating its entire internal economy. Scientists call this neuroadaptation reversal, but emotionally, it feels like reclaiming territory that was slowly stolen. In the first weeks of sobriety, the brain fights back with withdrawal, cravings, and emotional instability. It isn't weakness. It's chemistry. Circuits that depended on alcohol are suddenly forced to wake up on their own. Stress hormones spike. Dopamine collapses. Sleep shatters. For many people, this early stage is the storm that makes them believe sobriety is impossible. But this storm only lasts because the brain is trying to find equilibrium after years of artificial interference. What follows afterward, slowly and almost invisibly, is the beginning of real change. Once the brain realizes alcohol is not returning, it begins a long, steady repair process that most people never get to experience because they quit too early or relapse before the benefits reveal themselves. Around the third month, neurotransmitters start stabilizing. Dopamine receptors that were numbed begin waking up. This is why hobbies that once felt boring slowly become interesting again. It isn't that sobriety brings new joys. It's that alcohol stole the ability to feel normal joy. When those receptors recover, life starts to feel real again, and then at around 6 months, the prefrontal cortex, the command center responsible for decision-making, self-control, planning, and emotional regulation, begins functioning with a clarity most drinkers forget is possible. People often describe this as becoming a different person. but it is more accurate to say they are returning to the person they were supposed to be before alcohol interfered. By the time someone reaches the 1-year mark, the brain has undergone changes so profound that science compares it to the recovery seen after major trauma. The emotional system stabilizes. Stress responses shrink. Cortisol levels decrease. The brain's communication pathways grow stronger. The hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and learning, actually increases in volume because alcohol shrinks it over time. Studies show that after a year of abstinence, this region begins restoring itself, leading to clearer recall, better focus, and improved emotional processing. The person might not consciously feel these structural changes, but their life reflects it. They think more quickly, react more calmly, interpret situations more accurately, and handle conflict with more logic and less reactivity. It feels like the fog has finally lifted. But the biggest change after 1 full year alcohol-free is something no scan or lab test can fully capture: the return of emotional intelligence. Alcohol distorts emotional perception. It numbs certain feelings and exaggerates others. It pushes people into cycles of overreaction, impulsivity, or emotional shutdown. After a year, those patterns break. The brain becomes capable of observing emotions without drowning in them. People describe feeling stable for the first time in years, not overly happy, not overly sad, just stable, which is something alcohol made impossible. The amygdala, responsible for fear and threat detection, stops firing unnecessarily. The nervous system stops bracing for danger. A person begins to experience life without the constant background tension they didn't even know they were carrying. Something else happens too. Identity returns. Alcohol disconnects people from themselves. It interrupts self-reflection. It blurs values. It hijacks priorities. It puts life in survival mode. After a year of sobriety, people start remembering who they were before drinking became their default coping tool. They rediscover personal preferences, interests, and goals that were muted or forgotten. Their brain becomes capable of holding long-term plans again because the prefrontal cortex isn't constantly battling chemical imbalance. This is why many people radically improve their careers, relationships, mental health, and physical goals after reaching the 1-year mark. It isn't luck, it's biology. A healthy brain makes better decisions. And yet, the transformation is not only scientific, it is deeply emotional. After a year alcohol-free, people often realize how many of their past struggles were not personality flaws or moral failures, but simply chemical consequences. Anxiety they thought was natural begins to fade. Mood swings disappear. Emotional breakdowns become rare. They stop attracting chaos because they stop feeling chaotic inside. They no longer seek validation from numbing substances because their brain has regained its ability to self-soothe. They start to understand their emotions, respond instead of react, and see themselves with a clarity that alcohol had quietly stolen. But perhaps the most powerful change is the way the brain reconnects with pleasure. Alcohol rewires pleasure circuits so drastically that normal life becomes dull. Sunlight feels normal again after a year. Music hits differently. Conversations feel meaningful. Small victories feel big. The brain starts rewarding the person naturally without needing external chemicals. This is the part that most people never experience because most people never reach 1 year. They quit drinking, but they don't stay quit long enough to feel the real reward. The reward isn't just health. It is emotional rebirth. It is cognitive freedom. It is the return of a stable, focused, compassionate, self-aware mind. But there is one more layer, the one no one warns you about. When your brain heals after a year without alcohol, you begin to see your past clearly, not with regret, but with understanding. You begin to see the patterns alcohol covered up. You see the relationships that were built on your lowest version of yourself. You understand the emotional wounds you tried to anesthetize. You recognize the places where you lied to yourself. At first, this clarity is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront truths you used alcohol to avoid. But then, something shifts. The brain becomes capable of acceptance. It stops fighting the past and begins focusing on the future. This is the peace that comes with full neurological recovery. The ability to observe your life without drowning in it. Reaching 1 year, alcohol-free does not just change your brain. It changes your future. Every decision becomes more intentional. Every reaction becomes more controlled. Every emotion becomes more manageable. The brain is finally functioning with the balance it was designed for, without the artificial interference that once demanded constant compensation. In that clarity, people often discover a sense of quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, escape anything, or numb anything. It is the mind's natural state, restored, grounded, whole. By the time a person reaches a full year without alcohol, something extraordinary has taken place. Not only within the brain's physical networks, but within the psychological identity that those networks support. The person rising out of 12 months of sobriety is not simply a healthier version of who they were. They are someone who finally operates from a stable internal world instead of a chemically distorted one. And the more you understand how this internal shift happens, the more you begin to realize that the true transformation was never about quitting a drink. It was about rebuilding the foundation of the self. Even after a year, the brain continues repairing structures that were damaged long before the person realized they had a problem. Alcohol weakens the corpus callosum, the bridge that connects the left and right sides of the brain. A damaged connection means thoughts and emotions don't communicate properly. Logic and feeling get out of sync. People start thinking one thing and doing another. After a year of abstinence, these communication pathways begin firing harmoniously again. The person notices it in subtle ways. They respond with more patience. They understand conversations more deeply. They catch themselves before reacting impulsively. Their mind starts functioning like a coordinated team instead of disorganized fragments. They become someone capable of emotional coherence. But perhaps the most dramatic neurological shift after a year of sobriety is the restoration of dopamine balance. Alcohol floods the brain with unnatural spikes of dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward. Over time, the brain downregulates its receptors, reducing their sensitivity so it can protect itself from constant overstimulation. This means the person becomes unable to feel pleasure from ordinary life. They need alcohol, not just to feel good, but to feel anything. When they quit, the brain takes months to rebuild those receptors. And when a full year passes, something remarkable occurs. Dopamine begins functioning naturally again. The person starts feeling genuine excitement, curiosity, satisfaction, and joy without anything external forcing it. They wake up one day and realize they're finally enjoying life instead of escaping from it. This shift is incredibly emotional because it exposes how deeply alcohol controlled the person's reward system. When that control dissolves, the person begins reconnecting with experiences they forgot were meaningful. They feel the warmth of human connection. they rediscover creativity. They regain their love for movement, learning, and self-improvement. Their brain begins lighting up in response to authentic life instead of chemical manipulation. That is not just healing. That is liberation. The cognitive changes continue in ways most people never anticipate. Alcohol weakens the parts of the brain responsible for memory consolidation, which is why drinkers often struggle to remember conversations, details, or even parts of their own past. After a year without alcohol, the hippocampus, the memory center, grows stronger, literally increasing in volume. This means memories become sharper and more emotionally organized. People describe this as feeling like someone turned the lights on in their mind. They stop living in a fog of half-remembered days and start experiencing life with clarity. They begin retaining knowledge, recognizing patterns, and seeing connections they missed before. Their brain becomes capable of deep learning again. There is also a profound transformation in emotional regulation. Alcohol hijacks the limbic system, the area that processes fear, pleasure, anger, sadness, and stress. It amplifies some emotions while suppressing others. It creates emotional volatility and unpredictability. When someone reaches a year of sobriety, the limbic system begins functioning at a stable baseline again. This creates a sense of inner peace that is difficult to describe, but impossible to ignore. People stop being controlled by emotional impulses. They can feel sadness without falling apart. They can feel anger without losing control. They can feel joy without needing excess. Their emotional world becomes navigable instead of overwhelming. This is one of the most powerful gifts sobriety gives: the ability to feel deeply without being destroyed by what you feel. Another underrated transformation happens in the brain's threat response. Alcohol disrupts the amygdala, making the person hyper-reactive to stress. This is why long-term drinkers often feel anxious, uneasy, or irritable, even without external triggers. After a year of sobriety, the amygdala calms and the fight-or-flight response evens out. The person stops waking up with unexplained panic or tension. Their nervous system stops bracing for impact every day. They stop anticipating disaster mentally and physically. This reduction in baseline fear allows them to engage with life instead of hiding from it. They become more social, more confident, more grounded, and more capable of handling pressure. They aren't overwhelmed by small inconveniences anymore. Their stress tolerance expands dramatically. What surprises many people is the profound spiritual shift that occurs after a year without alcohol. Not necessarily religious, but existential alcohol takes away awareness. It dulls intuition. It narrows consciousness. When the brain heals, a person begins reconnecting with their internal voice, the one that alcohol muted. They start noticing subtle feelings, instincts, reflections, and insights that were buried under numbing. They gain a heightened sense of clarity about what matters and what doesn't. They recognize unhealthy relationships, destructive habits, and self-sabotaging patterns, not because someone tells them, but because their mind finally sees the truth without distortion. This level of self-awareness feels like waking up after years of sleepwalking. Many people describe a strange emotional phenomenon that appears around the year mark. They start grieving their old self. Not because they miss alcohol, but because they finally see how much of their life was shaped by a brain that wasn't fully functioning. They recognize opportunities they missed, relationships they harmed, and moments they numbed instead of living. But instead of drowning in regret, The sober brain begins processing these memories with compassion. It understands that the past version of them was operating under altered chemistry. Instead of shame, they feel empathy for their old self. This emotional integration is one of the final stages of long-term brain healing. The merging of past and present into a coherent identity. Another unexpected change after a year is the improvement in social intelligence. Alcohol damages the frontal lobe, which is responsible for social cues, empathy, and understanding complex emotional interactions. After 12 months of sobriety, people start noticing they can sense others' emotions more accurately. They become better listeners. They become more patient, and their relationships deepen. They communicate with clarity instead of defensiveness. This happens because the brain is no longer buffered by intoxication or withdrawal. It's fully awake, tuned into the world, and capable of emotional reciprocity. They begin to experience relationships as they were meant to be experienced, with attention, presence, and authenticity. The person also gains something else: confidence. Not the loud, reckless confidence that alcohol manufactured, but quiet, stable confidence built from clarity, discipline, and self-respect. Alcohol often masks insecurity under a layer of artificial boldness. After a year without it, the brain returns to a natural balance where confidence comes from self-trust rather than chemical delusion. People start believing they can handle life because they have proof. They survived 12 months without escaping into a substance that once felt necessary. This generates a powerful psychological shift: the belief that they can overcome anything. At this point, the external world begins to reflect the internal transformation. Careers improve because the brain can finally sustain focus, solve problems, and follow through with plans. Friendships become more honest. Romantic relationships stabilize, physical health improves, energy increases, sleep deepens, creativity returns. And with each improvement, the brain reinforces the belief that sobriety is not deprivation, it is alignment. But the most remarkable part of reaching 1 year alcohol-free is the sense of time reclaiming itself. Drinkers lose time in hangovers, in blackouts, in anxiety spirals, in nights that dissolve into memory gaps, in mornings spent recovering instead of living. After a year sober, time feels full again. Days stretch, mornings feel clear, nights feel peaceful. The brain stops wasting energy on damage control and starts using that energy for growth, healing, and creation. It is a shift from survival to expansion. A year without alcohol does not make life perfect. It makes life yours again. It gives you the mental clarity to face pain, the emotional stability to process it, the cognitive strength to understand it, and the spiritual presence to grow from it. It returns your brain to its natural state, adaptive, resilient, curious, and alive. And as the brain continues to heal into the second and third year, the person realizes that sobriety is not an ending but a beginning. A beginning of a life lived fully awake, fully aware, and fully aligned with the self alcohol once silenced.